projector work from here? Yes? George Sadowski earlier said predicting things is a challenge for him, and I joked with him that that's because he doesn't work in security. It's very easy to predict things in security because things seem to only get worse. So I'm actually going to briefly go through a presentation I gave 2 years ago, and I've updated it a little bit in a short period of time, but this was given to financial institutions in the United States at a conference called BITS. The title is Denial of Service Attacks. The present is bleak and the future uncertain. We mentioned already that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. As I said, I gave this talk 3 years ago. We've already talked about the fact that the DNS is a distributed database, and one of the things that we overlook very often is that as a distributed database and as a client, your name service has many dependencies. And you're also vulnerable to the attacks against some of these dependencies or attackers that leverage these dependencies to attack you. For example, open resolvers are used to reflect and amplify denial of service attacks, and they create enormous amounts of bandwidth. And as we talked about yesterday when we talked about Mirai, the Internet of Things devices create vast amounts of bandwidth potential for attackers in denial of service attacks. So who are your dependencies? Top-level domain operators, they run DNS. The root runs DNS. DNS hosting operators, resolver operators, ISPs, private network operators, and then, in fact, all the clients and servers and devices, and those that are not properly secured or not properly configured are your threats. And as we talked about yesterday, anything with circuitry that can spew packets is a potential threat at this point, especially if it's using the name service. So your response against DNS attacks, and this is where things are going to become a little bit controversial in my presentation, depends not only on your behavior, which is often self-beneficial as opposed to globally beneficial, but on other parties. So I'm going to emphasize today that we need to stop thinking about defending ourselves against denial of service attacks and thinking more globally. One of the biggest problems I have with DDoS protection services is that your line of abatement is, or the place where you're trying to stop an attack, is at the very end of the attack chain. The attack origins are really where you need to try to defend yourself. And many, many years ago, there was a firewall that was developed by a very, very young PhD student from Stanford. His name is Dr. Steven Savage, and he now is a professor at UCSD. And his firewall was one of the very few that I've ever seen that used source squelch, and they did backscatter analysis. And there's a very fine paper, if you're interested in it, that talks about that. And he left that firewall as a young CTO, decided to go back into academia, and it was the last I've seen of technology that actually addresses source squelch. So maybe we have to rethink that and go back and look again. It's not easy, but it's the thing that we have to do. So one of the things I think that we have to pay more attention to in denial of service attacks as a mitigation measure is cooperation, is understanding our role as an emitter, a potential emitter of packets that are in denial of service attack. And the more that we do to actually prevent our own networks from being the origins of attack against others, the better off we are. This also involves providing good intelligence and sharing that information across many, many parties. This is often very complicated, and very often people who are subjects to attack have no idea or no points of contact to actually go and seek abatement from other parties. In 2014 and 15, I had said DDoS attacks that will continue to increase in scale, intensity, and frequency. And so as a small scale, in 2015, there was an attack against the root service, and that was considered very, very large at 35 gigabits per second. The Mirai attack against the Krebs on security site was calculated at 600 megabits per second. So we're talking about an order of magnitude times 2, nearly times 2, in just about a year and a half. All right. So there are a couple of ways that we can fight back. One is to continue with voluntary adoption of best practices. Another is self-regulation. Another is regulatory action, and another is litigation. So let's look at how these are faring right now. One of the criticisms of voluntary adoption of best practices is that ISPs and network operators choose not to implement them because of cost and complexity. And there's no incentive versus the perceived direct value to the organization. This is where I say we're too self-beneficial in our thinking and not globally thinking. If you think about things like BCP 38, which is source address validation, which is very, very important in squelching attacks, the progress in having ISPs adopt this is pathetically slow. Right? So 2 years ago, I went and I asked several people who are very, very smart in the industry and very respected about what we need to do. And John Bambanek, who works at the Internet Storm Center at the time, said, doing DDoS mitigation right takes a fraction of the resources that it would take to comply to a mountain of regulation. So he was basically calling a bluff. He was saying, if you really think that this is going to go away, you're wrong. And if you don't pay attention, you're going to end up with more problems and more challenges in satisfying regulatory obligations than you are self-regulating. Self-regulation would actually be good if we stopped being only interested in our own selves. And Dr. Joel Snyder, who is a very, very long-time colleague of mine, says that disincentives might be the way to go. And so some disincentives could take the form of refusal to peer with an ISP or an access provider that doesn't provide source address validation, as an example. Paul Vixie, I think many of you know him as a very, very world-renowned expert on the domain name system. He used to work at Bind. He has an interesting passive DNS company now called Farsight. Said, perhaps what we need is civil action. Maybe victims should start filing suit against non-BCP compliant ISPs for something like contributory negligence. And then there's always the R word, regulatory. This is something that brings fear to everyone in the commercial industry. So here, one of the things that you might end up with is situations where governments don't accept bids for procurement of ISPs that don't provide source address validation, or make it costly to not be compliant. So I'm going to wrap up real quickly and just say that perhaps later when we have more interactive, what is it going to take for us to say enough and to go and do something? And then if we're going to do something, what kinds of measures, these or others, should we actually take to relieve this pain that is not going to go away without some change? Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Дэйв. Я позволю себе...
Thank you, Dave. I would like to play devil's advocate here. I will start asking questions to all the presenters, maybe not to be answered immediately, but hopefully you will be able to come up with some sort of answer later in the session. So, Dave, you mentioned that DDoS attacks is an important issue, and you perceive it as a priority threat, as an important threat. With the Internet of Things, I do not understand how you can combine refrigerators with washing machines and deal with them equally, and file in court to protect those from DDoS attacks. I just don't see this as a step you can take to protect ourselves against DDoS attacks by filing in court that my washing machine is malfunctioning. You don't have to answer now.